The room buzzed with the usual chatter and clinking glasses, but I stood frozen in a corner, clutching my little diploma case like it was a lifeline. My master's degree, years of late nights, counseling sessions, and barely there weekends, was meant to be a triumph, a moment to breathe and finally feel seen. Yet, as I scanned the crowd at my graduation party, my stomach sank deeper with every smug grin and loud laugh. James, my brother, was the epicenter of the room, booming about his high-paying job like it was the only thing that mattered. Anne, my mother-in-law, hovered nearby, her gaze flickering past me as though I were a faded photograph on the wall. "That's nice, Olivia," she said with a clipped smile when I told her about my degree. But the words felt hollow, empty of any real pride or warmth. I've been the family's invisible backbone for as long as I can remember, the one who pays the bills when others don't, who smooths over arguments no one else wants to touch, who listens to the endless complaints and quiet desperation with a patient smile. I've poured over $50,000 into James's college tuition, handed over $20,000 for Rachel's medical bills without a single thank you, and spent countless nights fielding frantic calls about broken appliances, illness, and financial crises. Yet Anne's subtle digs cut deeper than any debt ever could. "You're too serious, Olivia," she'd say, or, "You're overly sensitive, that's your problem." Her words are like tiny shards, embedding themselves in my skin until the ache becomes my default state. In the quiet moments, I hold on to a secret power that few suspect I even have. I manage the family's finances with a meticulous grip, controlling bank accounts and legal documents with precision. Anne believes she drives this machine, but she underestimates the quiet strength I wield behind the scenes. I've never flaunted this control. Instead, I've let my sacrifices be invisible, hoping they'd earn respect or, at the very least, acknowledgement. But the truth is, I'm exhausted. It feels like I'm drowning in a sea of thankless demands, and the phrase, "family first," has become a curse rather than a comfort. Still, I stand there, determined to keep holding it all together, even if no one else sees the weight I carry. I remember the last time I confronted Anne, quietly, almost silently, about her dismissiveness. She just smiled, that cold, practiced smile that said she held all the cards and I was just another pawn. The air between us was thick with unspoken tension, and I walked away feeling smaller than ever. But I refused to let her see me break. I've been the responsible one for too long to crumble now. As the party faded into background noise, I promised myself that someday I'd find a way out of this shadow, a way to step into the light where my efforts meant something beyond invisible sacrifice. The roots of this tangled family web stretch back to my earliest memories, haunting me like a ghost I can't shake. When I was 7, my world shattered in a way no child should have to endure. My father Daniel was declared dead, faked, as I later pieced together, from a life of poverty and struggle that Anne couldn't bear. I remember the funeral vividly, the hush of whispered condolences, the heavy black dresses, the brittle tears that seemed more obligation than sorrow. But what haunted me most was the silence that followed, the way my family erased him as if he'd never existed. From that day, James was crowned the golden child, showered with gifts and praise as if his worth justified the void left behind. Meanwhile, I was told to be practical, to help carry the weight of what Anne painted as necessary sacrifice. I tried to understand, to rationalize the unfairness that clung to me like a shadow. "It's for the family," I told myself. "Be strong, be responsible." But even then, the whispers of doubt crept in, the bitter taste of being less than enough. At school events, I watched James bask in attention while I faded into the background. Always the helper, never the hero. Anne's words echoed in my mind. "You're too serious, Olivia. Learn to let go." But letting go felt like losing myself. Those early years carved a deep groove of self-sacrifice into my heart, teaching me that my needs were secondary, my dreams a luxury. As I grew older, I carried this legacy into adulthood, hoping that time might soften the edges, but the pattern only deepened. I poured money into James's $30,000 wedding, watched as Rachel's medical bills stacked up to $40,000, and covered mounting hospital costs for Anne herself without complaint. I fixed the family's aging property with my own savings, delaying vacations and shelving dreams to keep the peace and the fragile illusion of stability intact. Mark, my husband, is my quiet ally. He listens, supports me softly, but the weight of confronting Anne directly seems to paralyze him. He fears the family storm that stirs whenever I push back. Behind the scenes, I tightened my grip on the family's financial reins, managing bank accounts and tax documents with an iron will. Anne assumes she controls everything, but she hasn't realized how much I've come to understand, how much power I quietly hold. James and Rachel play their parts too. James, with his entitled demands and careless smirks. Rachel, with her sycophantic glare that isolates me further. Together, they maintain the delicate balance of control that Anne orchestrates. And yet, beneath it all, I'm building a reservoir of resolve, even if it's invisible to those around me. The first public crack in the facade came at a family reunion I'll never forget. The sun was setting, casting a warm glow over the sprawling backyard, but the warmth didn't reach me. Anne, perched among her friends, let her voice carry loud and clear, dismissing my recent promotion to school counselor with a sneer. "Oh, that's nice, dear," she said, her tone dripping with condescension. "But Mark's job at the firm is the real success around here." The words hit me like a cold slap. I forced a laugh, masking the sting that spread like fire across my cheeks. James smirked nearby. Rachel's glare was sharp enough to cut glass, and Anne's smile was all ice. Inside, I felt the familiar ache of invisibility, the frustration of being minimized in front of everyone I cared about. But I told myself it was just one moment, that maybe I was reading too much into it. Maybe my efforts did matter, just not in the way this family chose to see. I watched as the conversation moved on. The laughter resumed, and the night carried on as if nothing had happened. Still, the seed of doubt was planted firmly in my heart. Did I ever truly matter to them, or was I destined to be the invisible caretaker, applauded only in silence? I clenched my fists, swallowing the hurt, determined not to let this break me. Not yet. I could feel it before I even heard the whispers, the subtle shift in the air, like a tightening noose around my neck. Anne's counterattack was quiet at first, subtle enough that I almost convinced myself I was imagining it. But the looks that flickered away when I entered the room, the hushed conversations that evaporated when I approached, they weren't accidents. Rachel's sudden coldness was the loudest signal. Once my sister-in-law, now a distant shadow who barely met my eyes. I caught snippets of Anne's poisonous words ricocheting through the family grapevine. "Olivia's just playing the victim. She's selfish, always thinking about herself. Too stressed from work. She's not thinking straight." It was gaslighting on a masterful scale, designed to make me doubt my own feelings, to question my sanity. Anne's voice was a knife disguised as silk when she finally confronted me in front of Mark and a few family members. "You're imagining things, Olivia. You've always been too sensitive. Maybe if you weren't so self-absorbed, you'd see how much we all sacrifice for this family." Her eyes gleamed with the satisfaction of the predator who thinks she's cornered her prey. She didn't just dismiss my frustrations, she twisted them against me. When I tried to explain how I felt invisible, unappreciated, her response was a venomous whisper, barely audible but heavy with accusation. "Loyalty means sacrifice without complaint. Maybe you're not as loyal as you think." The sting of those words was sharper than any blame she ever laid at my feet before. I realized then that my emotional support network was quietly crumbling. Friendly nods became curt greetings. Warm smiles turned into forced politeness. Rachel, once a tentative ally, now whispered Anne's narrative to anyone who would listen. Even Mark seemed caught in the crossfire. His usual quiet support replaced by conflicted silence. The house felt colder, the rooms emptier. I was being isolated, deliberately cut off from the family I'd given everything to hold together. And yet, despite the tightening noose, I clung to a frail hope that maybe, just maybe, I could still fix this. I told myself I wasn't alone, that this was a battle I could win with honesty and patience. But deep down, I felt the weight of the storm gathering, ready to shatter everything I'd built. Determined to stop the slow unraveling before it swallowed me whole, I called for a family meeting. I invited Mark, Anne, James, and yes, Rachel. hoping the presence of each key player might force honesty into the open. I spent hours compiling every dollar I'd sacrificed, every late-night call I'd answered, every moment of emotional labor I'd shouldered. When the day came, I laid out the spreadsheet, columns filled with numbers showing tuition, medical bills, repairs, proof in black and white of my unseen contributions. "I'm not asking for money back," I said, my voice steady but soft. "I'm asking for acknowledgement, for respect, for an end to the silence about what I've done." Anne's smirk was immediate, as if she had been waiting for this moment to twist my words into weapons against me. "Keeping score," she scoffed. "That's not what family is about. You're breaking the harmony we've worked so hard to maintain." James nodded, his eyes slick with entitlement, while Rachel's cold gaze sharpened even further. A cousin, drafted as mediator, tried to soothe the rising tension, but soon sided with Anne, praising her sacrifices and reminding us all of the importance of tradition. The room, which I hoped would be a sanctuary for healing, became a battleground where my truth was trampled beneath the weight of long-held biases. I left that meeting hollow and defeated, the fragile hope I'd carried like a candle snuffed out by a cruel wind. The humiliation didn't end there. Weeks later, at my graduation ceremony, the family's cold indifference was palpable. The hall was filled with proud faces, but the warmth I expected from my own blood was missing. Anne's attention was all on James, showering him with loud congratulations and ostentatious gifts, her smile broad and feigned with sincerity. When it came to me, she offered only a clipped, "That's nice, dear," as though my achievement was a mere footnote unworthy of celebration. Worse, I overheard her telling family friends that I only pursued the degree to escape family responsibility, a cruel lie that cast doubt on my integrity and dedication. Mark's colleagues were there, awkwardly shifting in their seats, their eyes flickering between the whispers and the cold glances I endured. The sting of that moment burrowed deep into my chest. It wasn't just the public dismissal, it was the unraveling of my professional reputation, the whispered gossip that could spread like wildfire and undo years of hard work. I stood there, diploma in hand, feeling smaller than ever, my pride crushed beneath the weight of Anne's scheming. The laughter around me felt like a taunt, a reminder that no matter what I achieved, I would always be less in her eyes. I wanted to scream, to demand the recognition I deserved, but the words stuck in my throat, swallowed by the shame and the overwhelming exhaustion that had settled in my bones. In a last desperate attempt to salvage what was left of our fractured relationship, I sought Anne out privately. I remember the way her eyes narrowed when I found her alone in the kitchen, the cool detachment she wore like armor. "I need you to stop tearing me down," I said, my voice trembling but resolute. "I need you to acknowledge everything I've done for this family." She looked at me like I was a child begging for scraps, her voice icy as she replied, "You'll never be good enough, Olivia. You're too weak to handle real success." Those words were a dagger, cutting through the last threads of hope I'd clung to. I tried to explain my need for boundaries, for respect, for a chance to be seen as more than just the family's invisible caretaker. But Anne dismissed me with a cold laugh, her disdain a wall I couldn't breach. It was clear then that she would never change, never soften, never acknowledge my worth. That moment crushed me, not because I doubted myself, but because the woman who should have been family had chosen cruelty and control over love and acceptance. I walked away from her that day with a heart heavier than ever, knowing the line had been crossed, and the path forward would be nothing like the one I'd once hoped for. The walls around me seemed to close tighter with every passing day, squeezing whatever light I had left into a flicker barely visible. After my confrontation, Anne didn't just dismiss me. She weaponized the family against me. Mark, usually my quiet refuge, grew distant, caught between loyalty to his mother and his wife. His silences at the dinner table screamed louder than any argument ever could. James, emboldened by Anne's venom, openly criticized my financial decisions at family gatherings, his voice laced with disdain as he called me irresponsible for daring to question the flow of money. Rachel's cold eyes and whispered rumors spread through the family like poison, painting me as the reckless spender. the selfish one who mismanaged what little I was entrusted with. Invitations I once received without hesitation grew scarce, as if I was gradually being erased from the social fabric I thought I belonged to. Even close friends, entangled in the family's web, began to pull away, their smiles forced, their excuses thin. The phone, once a lifeline, now rang less often, and when it did, it was with hesitance or obligation. I felt isolated in a silent room, surrounded by people who once claimed to care, but now recoiled from me. The laughter at family gatherings echoed hollowly in my ears, a cruel reminder that I sat on the outside of a circle I had helped build. I questioned everything. Was I truly at fault? Had I been too naive, too trusting, to believe in family love? The long nights were filled with self-doubt, the gnawing fear that perhaps I had been the fool all along, pouring out my heart, my money, my soul, only to be cast aside like a broken thread. The crushing weight of betrayal settled deep in my chest, and for the first time in years, I allowed myself to think about giving up. The idea was terrifying, but the thought of continuing this charade, this exhausting performance where I was the villain in my own story, was unbearable. I sat in the stillness of my bedroom, the soft hum of the city outside a distant lullaby, my mind racing through every insult, every cold glance, every whispered accusation. The line between love and manipulation blurred until I could no longer distinguish where one ended and the other began. I was drowning in a sea of isolation, my pleas unheard, my sacrifices invisible. The family I had once held together with quiet strength was fracturing me from within. Yet, somewhere in the depths of that despair, a tiny ember flickered, a fragile spark of something I hadn't felt in a long time, the faintest hint of defiance. When I found out about the bank accounts, it was like the ground fell out from beneath me. I had noticed discrepancies before, small withdrawals here, odd charges there, but I dismissed them as errors, hoping for explanations that never came. The truth hit like a sledgehammer. Anne had been siphoning money from accounts I managed, money I thought was safe, money meant to stabilize the family, to pay debts, to build a future. Instead, it funded her lavish vacations, expensive gifts, the illusion of a grieving widow living beyond her means. My fingers trembled as I held the bank statements, the numbers stark and undeniable. The betrayal cut deeper than any words. The family Christmas gathering was supposed to be a time of peace, of warmth, but it became the stage for my shattering. I confronted Anne, my voice steady despite the storm raging inside me. "These withdrawals! Where did the money go?" I demanded, holding up the printouts. Mark's eyes widened in shock. James's face twisted with disbelief. Anne's expression hardened, her practiced calm slipping just enough to reveal the cold calculation beneath. She denied everything with a smooth, chilling certainty, spinning lies and gaslighting me in front of our family. "You're imagining things, Olivia," she said, voice low but sharp. "You're just trying to cause trouble." But the truth was plain. Anne's perfect widow act was nothing but a facade, a mask hiding secrets that shook the foundation of my world. Daniel, my father, declared dead all those years ago, was alive, hidden away. The woman who had tormented me, belittled me, stolen my peace, was living a lie built on my pain. The shock made the room freeze, the air thick with tension. My heart broke, but beneath the shards of hurt, something fierce ignited. Enough was enough. I would not be their ATM, their scapegoat, their silent victim any longer. This betrayal was a breaking point, and from it, a cold clarity emerged, sharp and unyielding. Alone in the quiet aftermath, I replayed years of sacrifice and betrayal, each memory a wound that refused to heal. The faked funerals, the whispered lies, the financial burdens I carried like invisible chains, all orchestrated by Anne to trap me in a cycle of dependence and pain. Anger bubbled up from the depths of my soul, sharp and hot, replacing the numbness that had dulled my senses for so long. I saw clearly now how grief had been twisted into a weapon against me, how every dollar I gave was a thread in her web of control. The belittling comments, the dismissals, the calculated isolation, They were all pieces of the same cruel puzzle. I remembered every moment I had swallowed my pride, every time I had silenced my hurt to keep the peace. But that peace was a lie, a fragile veneer over a family poisoned by greed and manipulation. The realization hit me like a storm. I had been invisible for too long. No more. No more silent suffering. No more enduring, hoping, sacrificing without recognition. The anger fueled a promise I whispered to myself in the dark. I would reclaim my life, my dignity, my truth. The cycle ends here. I would no longer be the invisible caretaker, the forgotten daughter, the family's secret sacrifice. The morning light filtered through the curtains as I sat down with Mark, the weight of my revelation pressing against my chest. I laid bare the truth, the lies, the theft, the manipulation, everything Anne had done to fracture us. "I'm done being the family ATM," I said, my voice steady but resolute. For the first time, Mark didn't hesitate or deflect. The conflict in his eyes gave way to a quiet determination. He reached out, taking my hand as an unspoken pledge of support. Together, we began to map out a plan, cold and calculated, a strategy to reclaim what was rightfully mine. We started by shifting control of the accounts, securing the finances that had been so carelessly exploited. Legal notices were drafted, boundaries drawn with precision I hadn't dared to wield before. The calmness in my voice surprised even me. It was the voice of someone who had survived the storm and was ready to weather the next. I braced myself for the fallout, knowing that dismantling the web Anne had spun would not be easy. But for the first time in years, I felt the weight lift, replaced by a quiet strength that steadied my resolve. This was a new chapter, not one of silent suffering, but of strategic reclaiming and unyielding boundary setting. The family I once knew was breaking apart, but I was finally breaking free. I started by laying everything out on the kitchen table one evening, the soft hum of the city outside a stark contrast to the storm brewing inside me. I gathered bank statements, tax filings, credit card bills, everything that could map out how much Anne and the family depended on me. It was overwhelming at first, the sheer volume of documents telling a story I hadn't fully grasped before. I traced my signatures on countless checks, my name on account authorizations, power of attorney papers I'd signed years ago out of obligation and trust. The realization hit me like a weight. I was the family's financial backbone in more ways than I'd dared to admit. They leaned on me not just emotionally but legally and practically, relying on my stability to prop up their lives. I felt a strange mix of anger and empowerment. This wasn't just about money, it was about control, about the invisible chains I'd accepted without question. I called my lawyer, a steady voice of reason in the chaos, and laid out everything. She walked me through my rights, the limits of Anne's access, and how I could reclaim control without immediate confrontation. The power of the legal documents I held became clear, power that Anne thought was hers alone. I took notes furiously, my mind sharpening with every detail. I realized Anne's entire facade depended on my compliance, on my silence, on my willingness to absorb the financial burdens without pushback. That night, as I spread the papers across the floor in my quiet apartment, I saw the family's vulnerabilities mapped out in black and white. Anne's lavish lifestyle, funded by accounts I managed, James's tuition and lifestyle expenses, paid without question, Rachel's medical bills, quietly covered by me to keep peace. The weight of their dependence was suffocating but also clarifying. I was no longer just the invisible caretaker. I was the linchpin holding their fragile world together. And for the first time, I understood that this leverage was mine to wield if I chose. I was no longer just the victim. I was a player in the game, with cards no one expected me to hold. I closed the folder carefully, feeling the stirrings of something fierce and unyielding inside me. This knowledge was a weapon, but it was also a shield. I was ready to stop being the family's safety net for their endless crises. I had spent years bending to their needs, sacrificing my peace and dignity, but now I was mapping out the boundaries. The days ahead would be hard. Anne would resist. The family would turn. But I would no longer be invisible. The tables were turning, and I was quietly preparing my move. Behind the calm surface of everyday life, I began weaving my quiet web of preparation. I kept my tone light and unruffled around Anne, masking the storm gathering beneath. She continued to treat me as the dependable, responsible one, unaware that her grip was slipping. Late at night, I changed passwords on shared accounts, transferring critical funds into secure personal accounts only I could access. Each transaction felt like reclaiming a piece of myself, a small victory in a battle no one else knew was happening. I moved like a shadow through my own life, careful not to arouse suspicion, balancing patience with a simmering resolve. Legal documents were finalized with precision. I worked closely with my lawyer to draft papers restricting Anne's financial control, quietly filing to limit her access to accounts and assets. I made sure the paperwork was airtight, a legal fortress that would protect me when the time came to unveil it. At the same time, I started archiving every communication, texts, emails, voicemails that revealed Anne's manipulations, her lies, her calculated attempts to undermine me. Each message was a thread in the tapestry of deceit I was gathering, proof to back up the truth I would eventually expose. Family gatherings became a stage where I performed the role they expected, a calm, responsible Olivia, the ever-reliable caretaker. Anne smiled her practiced smile, oblivious to the fact that I was silently stripping away the control she believed she wielded. Mark, caught between his mother and me, remained unaware of the undercurrents shifting beneath the surface. James and Rachel continued their subtle jabs, thinking I was still the same compliant woman I had always been. But inside, I was a quiet storm, gathering strength, poised for the moment when the facade would shatter. In the attic, amidst dust and forgotten memories, I found something that changed everything. I was sorting through old boxes, hoping to find some remnants of my father, Daniel, when a sealed envelope slipped from beneath a stack of brittle papers. It was addressed to me, my name written in my father's familiar handwriting, dated just weeks before his supposed death. My hands trembled as I broke the seal, the paper brittle but the words inside burning with clarity. Daniel's voice echoed through the letter, raw and urgent. He was alive, forced into hiding by Anne's ruthless grip. His death a cruel deception engineered to seize his assets. The letter was a confession and a plea. Daniel detailed how Anne manipulated him, faked his death for insurance money, and controlled the family through lies and fear. He named me as the rightful heir to his estate, a legal will enclosed to prove it. My breath caught in my throat as the magnitude of the revelation sank in. The woman who had tormented me for years was living a lie built on theft and betrayal. The truth was no longer a shadow in the background. It was a blazing light exposing every hidden corner of our family's dark history. My heart pounded with a fierce mix of grief and rage. The betrayal cut deeper than ever, but so did the clarity it brought. I wasn't just fighting for respect or acknowledgement anymore. I was fighting to reclaim a legacy stolen from me, to expose a web of lies spun by the person who should have been family. The urgency to act surged through me, the path ahead clearer but fraught with danger. I folded the letter carefully, a newfound resolve hardening inside me. This was no longer a quiet struggle. It was a reckoning. The first moves were deliberate and cold, a silent reckoning that began with a whisper rather than a shout. I froze the joint accounts Anne used, watching as transactions she relied on were denied one by one. Automatic payments for her extravagant expenses stopped without explanation. For the first time in years, the financial drip that had sustained her lifestyle slowed to a trickle, then halted. Anne's world began to unravel in small, almost imperceptible ways. Credit cards declined at boutiques, bills left unpaid, phone calls ignored. She noticed the disruptions but didn't suspect me. She still believed I was the ever-reliable Olivia, too soft to strike back. I sent a quiet message to family members, informing them that I would no longer cover shortfalls or bailouts. The tone was firm but calm. I was drawing lines, setting boundaries that could no longer be crossed. Anne's facade began to crack as whispers of unpaid debts and frozen accounts spread. I also took control of the family's social media and private group chats, blocking Anne's access. She found herself increasingly isolated, cut off from the digital threads that kept family gossip and power flowing. The walls she had built around her influence started to crumble, brick by brick. The first consequences rippled through family gatherings. Anne's frustration simmered beneath forced smiles, her usual sharp tongue dulled by confusion and suspicion. She lashed out in subtle ways, accusing others of mistakes, trying to regain control through manipulation, but the cold silence met her instead. The family noticed the shifts, but none connected the dots back to me. I watched from the sidelines, steady and silent, as the first tremors of change shook the foundation Anne had built. The game had begun, and for once, I held the upper hand. The day of reckoning arrived on a crisp autumn afternoon, the sunlight filtering weakly through heavy clouds, as if the sky itself anticipated the storm inside our living room. I had summoned the family for a meeting. Mark, James, Rachel, and of course, Anne. The room felt charged, every chair a throne for a player in a game that had dragged on too long. My hands were steady as I laid the worn letter from Daniel on the polished oak table, placing beside it the legal will that sealed the truth Anne had worked so hard to bury. The silence was thick, suffocating, as all eyes settled on the documents that exposed decades of deceit. For years, Anne had woven a tapestry of lies, painting herself the grieving widow while spinning webs to siphon resources and control the family's narrative. Today, that web unraveled before them all. My voice was calm, deliberate, as I said, "This letter is from Daniel. He is alive. Anne's story, his death, the insurance claims, the control she's exerted, are nothing but lies. These assets belong where they rightfully should. I am no longer the family's scapegoat or ATM." I could see the flicker of shock ripple across Anne's face, the first crack in her carefully constructed mask. For once, she was mute, stripped of her usual deflections and venom. Mark's jaw tightened, a flicker of guilt and helplessness crossing his eyes as he looked at his mother. James shifted uncomfortably, no longer the entitled brother who basked in favoritism, but a man caught in the crossfire of truth. Rachel's usual smirk faltered, replaced by a stunned silence that spoke louder than any words. I felt the weight of their gazes, the shifting of power in the room, a palpable reversal that sent a thrill through me. This was my moment, the champagne moment, the end of my silent suffering and the birth of my authority. Where once I had been invisible, now I stood undeniable, my boundaries firm, and my voice unshakable. Anne finally found words, but they were weak, defensive. "You have no idea what you're doing," she hissed, but her tone lacked conviction. The room no longer trembled at her voice. Instead, it recoiled. I held my ground, the letter and will my shield, the truth my sword. The family witnessed the collapse of the matriarch's empire of lies, and in that charged silence, I tasted freedom, a freedom I had fought years to claim. This confrontation was not just a battle won, it was the dawn of a new chapter, where I was no longer a victim, but the woman who reclaimed her life. Anne's world began to crumble like a house of cards in a relentless wind. The reaction was swift and brutal. Within days, other family members, armed with my evidence, confronted her with demands she could no longer evade. Rumors of her fraudulent insurance claims and financial mismanagement spread, igniting suspicion that reached beyond our family circle. Legal scrutiny loomed like a dark cloud over her once untouchable status. Yet, in the face of this unraveling, Anne's strategy shifted, from denial to desperate love bombing, showering me with gifts, apologies dripping with false sincerity, and empty promises of change. But I was no longer the pliant woman who swallowed pain to keep peace. I met her attempts with cold, calculated boundaries. I refused her gifts, ignored her tearful apologies, and kept our conversations strictly business. Each gesture she made felt like a desperate grasp at a fading illusion of control, and I would not let her manipulate me again. Anne's social standing within the family eroded sharply, her influence waning as whispers of her deceit grew louder. She reached out frantically to Mark and James, trying to pull them back into her orbit, but their responses were cautious, edged with skepticism and disappointment. The isolation that Anne had long imposed on me was now reversing, and she found herself cast out from the very network she had controlled for so long. Family gatherings, once her stage, became mine to command, and Anne's presence dwindled to uneasy sideline appearances. The house felt different, lighter, freer, without her suffocating grip on every conversation and decision. The power I reclaimed was intoxicating, but I remained vigilant, knowing that desperation could breed dangerous moves. Anne's empire was crumbling, and I stood firm, watching her world fall apart piece by piece, the architect of her downfall now unmistakably clear. Anne's final attempts to claw back control became increasingly frantic and blatant. She enlisted Rachel, her most loyal follower, to bombard me with guilt-laden messages accusing me of shattering the family, threatening estrangement if I didn't relent. The flying monkeys multiplied. Phone calls, texts, social media posts, each laced with veiled threats and manipulative pleas. Even legal threats appeared, subtle warnings about potential lawsuits and defamation. But I was prepared. Mark stood beside me, a quiet pillar of support, while my lawyer guided me through every step of maintaining my boundaries. I blocked their attempts for contact, documented every interaction meticulously for my protection. The venom that once aimed to intimidate me bounced harmlessly off the armor of my resolve. Rachel's messages grew shrill, desperate. Anne's threats lost their bite as they echoed into a void of my silence. The family's dynamics shifted visibly. Anne's isolation became complete, her power shattered beyond repair. No longer the matriarch, she was a shell of control, watching from the sidelines as the family she tried to dominate moved on without her. Despite the chaos and confrontation, I found an unexpected calm in this storm. The boundaries I set were firm and unwavering, a fortress protecting my newfound peace. Each failed attempt at manipulation was a brick in the wall I built around my heart. I felt the old wounds begin to heal, the heavy burden of invisible sacrifice lifting at last. Anne's fading presence was a quiet victory, a testament to the strength I had cultivated in the face of relentless pressure. In the silence that followed, I felt not bitterness, but a profound relief and clarity about what I deserved and would no longer surrender. With Anne marginalized and the family's tangled web untangled, I finally found peace. Mark and I rebuilt our relationship on a foundation of trust and mutual respect, the shared victory knitting us closer than ever before. Together, we established clear boundaries, not just financial but emotional, ensuring the cycle of exploitation could never repeat. The family gatherings regained a warmth that had been absent for years, no longer shadowed by Anne's cold control. Anne faced ongoing legal battles and faded from the center of our lives, a cautionary figure of greed and manipulation left behind. As I sit now in the quiet of my home, the weight of years lifts from my shoulders. I reflect on the journey, the invisible sacrifices, the betrayals, the painful awakenings, and a fierce pride blooms within me. I lost years to lies and sacrifice, I whisper to myself, but I finally found myself. And that's the greatest inheritance. The future stretches before me, unburdened and bright, a canvas for the woman I have become. No longer invisible, no longer silent. I am free, whole, and ready to live on my own terms.